am I the asshole for defending my wife after she purposefully dumped coffee on a kid? Oh. My wife and I are both 34 and kid-free. My brother, Mac, 28, started dating 30-year-old Heather roughly a year ago, and she came with 3 kids. 12-year-old Anna, who is 100% the problem child. The boys, 6 and 8, are great. Anna, on the other hand, purposefully does shit to piss people off at every turn and is extremely defiant, and her mother lets her get away with it. We own a camp on a lake, and once a year we host a large barbecue and weekend stay for the entire family. Mac brought Heather and the kids. Anna was a shit all weekend, picking fights with people, throwing tantrums, hitting, etc. And Heather just stood back saying, quote, I don't know why she acts like that, rather than do anything to correct her kid. My wife was getting noticeably more pissed off as the hours progressed, but nothing like yesterday. Yesterday, we were all sitting out on the deck talking and enjoying a coffee, and Anna was underfoot per usual. She was told to go play with the other kids several times, and she refused, finding excuses to be involved in the conversation, which included picking up a fly swatter and swatting at flies all around the adults, knocking over our coffees several times. She was also smacking my wife with the swatter repeatedly, saying there were flies on her when there wasn't. My wife at one point looked at Heather and said, either get your kid the fuck out of here or I'm going to lose my shit. I also spoke to my brother several times about him stepping in. This was following Anna dumping my wife's fresh coffee all over the place, including on her, for the second time. Cold coffee. My wife doesn't drink hot coffee. Heather said a clip, Anna, go play. And that was it. No follow through. Well, Anna comes right back in and slaps my wife on the forehead with the swatter and says, bug, missed him. My wife took her coffee, her third one that she had just made, again, cold, and flung it at Anna, covering her. Anna immediately starts crying and Heather flips out. So does my brother, saying that my wife was an immature cunt and that she's just a fucking kid. My wife calmly puts her cup down and continues conversation like nothing happened.
Period.
As Anna, Heather, and Mac are all flipping out. Then Heather says, quote, do you have anything to fucking say for yourself? And my wife says, don't let the door hit you and your demon spawn on the ass on the way out. Oops. Some of the adults are saying maybe an apology is warranted and that we are assholes for not giving one. I personally don't think so. Am I the asshole?
Am I the asshole for making a joke about my wife's intelligence? My wife has an extremely big heart and cares for everyone around her. She always tends to see the absolute best in people, which leads to people taking advantage of her. She's been robbed because of her optimistic outlook on life. My wife is the timid type, never the confrontational type, and not the sharpest tool in the shed. I have a very good friend who I'm referring to as Stan for anonymous reasons. Stan and I have been friends for a very long time, and he is an extremely intelligent man with a PhD and a professor at an esteemed university. When restrictions eased, Stan came to visit me. My wife is very interested in Stan's line of work. When I introduced Stan to my wife, she began to ask him questions all related to his career. Oh. He answered them politely, but it felt more like an impromptu interview than two friends catching up when my wife was around. I told my wife that her fascination with Stan's career could possibly make him very uncomfortable. I didn't ask Stan, though. She apologized and promised to not ask questions and only speak when spoken to. She apologized and promised to not ask questions and only speak when spoken to. Okay. I invited Stan and his wife to a friendly dinner, and Stan's wife complimented my wife on her multilingualism. My wife is stupid and doesn't, but knows multiple languages. I invited Stan and his wife to a friendly dinner, and Stan's wife complimented my wife on her multilingualism, and my wife could not stop gushing about it when they left. She's very insecure in the presence of very intelligent people, and getting a compliment from an extremely intelligent person, especially a linguist, must have boosted her self-esteem. Yeah. I politely asked her to stop talking about my friends, but she started rambling about how someone saying, you sound like a native, is a very meaningful comment to her considering a bunch of other factors. I made a harmless joke about why she's so surprised about someone complimenting her intelligence is because she's not that intelligent. Instead of laughing along, she got offended, and I tried to explain myself by saying that no normal person would keep talking about one compliment that a stranger gave to them, and that I knew she was obviously insecure being in the presence of very intelligent people, and that compliment is acting as, quote, compensation? She's very upset with me, and I've tried to have an adult conversation with her, but she's not listening to me, so get it, I'm an asshole, I'll apologize and try to fix this.
I saved my son by getting full custody as a single dad. My wife filed for divorce because she was no longer attracted to me after my accident in which I lost my leg. We had an agreement that I could see my son anytime I wanted, but he wouldn't be doing any overnight visits unless or until I had a motel or apartment. At the time, my RV had no heat and the doors didn't lock, and I didn't feel comfortable with him sleeping there. Shortly after his 7th birthday, he called me super upset, crying that he didn't want to be there anymore. He told me that his mom's boyfriend's kids were making fun of him for asking about going to therapy. He said he only told mom and that she must have told the whole house. When I brought up his therapy, my ex dismissed the idea entirely, saying there's no reason why a 7-year-old needs a psychiatrist to pump him up with drugs. I told her he doesn't need medication, but having someone to talk to about things would be beneficial. Her exact words were, "Since you don't have any money, it might be hard to grasp that those of us who do don't want to waste it on problems that are imaginary." Anything involving our son, she uses the fact that she is a primary caretaker with money and I need to just go along with whatever she says. I was completely unaware that her boyfriend and kids moved in. The boys took over my son's room and threw away his clothes that were on the floor, which were only on the floor because they took his dresser. They also play this game where one of the boys puts a pillow over his head and farts, and when he tries to get up from under the pillow, boys both sit on the pillow and laugh. I asked him how long they do this for, and he says until he plays dead and stops moving. I confronted my ex and told her what our son told me, and she said that it was just roughhousing and he is just sensitive because he was an only child, so he doesn't know how to play. Covering someone's face and sitting on them is not a game. This was not just boys being boys. She let out a huge annoyed sigh and said her boyfriend has his own way of raising boys and that since he lives there and not me, they run the house how they want. Her boyfriend took my son's phone because he was being disrespectful. I asked her to elaborate. My son didn't want to rub her boyfriend's feet as a chore. My son, under no circumstance, should ever have to touch someone he doesn't want to touch, and calling it a chore is predatory. As I'm saying all of this, her boyfriend comes around the corner laughing and says, "Ha ha ha, I don't know what you are moaning and groaning about. You don't live here. Don't come here making demands." Before I could respond, he said that I should just take my sissy of a son back to the trailer park because if he doesn't want to listen to the man of the house, he can go. I'm not taking my son from his mother, nor am I jealous that she is in a new relationship. My son needs his mom. He needs us both, but right now she isn't paying attention, and I mean that in the simplest terms. She is sex drunk. I filed for emergency custody, and today was our hearing. She came with her boyfriend and his kids. His mom didn't say a word to our son. She was laughing and playing with her boyfriend's boys while we waited. I had to sit and watch my son watch them with tears in his eyes. He asked me, "Mom has known me my whole life. Why is she picking them?" I had no response because I felt the exact same way. She didn't contest my custody, and I almost got in trouble myself because I asked her to get her head checked because she is acting like she might have a brain tumor.
2 tampons may mean my marriage is over. Originally posted September 2nd, 2023. I, 29 female, have been with my husband, 30 male, for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had a reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. I pulled it out and saw that it was a tampon. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. I brought it to my husband's attention, and he didn't seem to understand what it was, let alone why I was holding it, until I told him where I'd found it and why I was almost certain that it wasn't mine. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker, Fiona. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his coworkers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. So I figured it was entirely possible the tampon had slipped out of her purse whenever he had driven with them or offered her a ride. No big deal. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple of weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed to not have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb? I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair affair and even more nauseated at the thought of the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I've found. What should I do? Relevant comments. I've had a period 30 years and have never put a tampon in a sock drawer. Trust your gut and get cameras. Neither have I. I've considered so many explanations for the tampons that wouldn't implicate my husband, but none of them make sense really. I'm terrified to set up a camera if it means confirming what I suspect right now. Question: has Fiona ever been over to your house and had time to plant a tampon? Response: she's been to our house many times and vice versa. To my knowledge, she wasn't over at any time in the past week. So if she planted that second tampon, she had to have found a window of time when I wasn't home. Anytime she and her husband visit, we all stay downstairs. And you'd have to really go out of your way to make it to our bedroom. For example, around our dogs, over the safety gate, past the other bedrooms. Not saying it's impossible, but definitely tricky to do in a quick bathroom break, I would guess. Question: how old are your kids? Could they have found a tampon and put it in your random place? Response: 2 and almost 4. Both have a mischievous streak, so I don't want to rule out the possibility of one of them moving stuff around, but I can't imagine how they'd get their hands on one, possibly 2 random tampons that I never bought. Update post September 20th, 2023, 18 days later. Contemplating every possible source of the 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting on here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all of the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We covered tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbencies. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona, either effing my husband, effing with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced or foreign items, there were none. And even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2-year-old, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler I had left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie that I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kind of clothes they wear. I had sworn off the full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before we had ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, in my opinion. Agreed. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice. I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have leashed out and come forward with the accusation right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room, and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a 3rd time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. Final update, October 6th, 2023. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I had gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids the way I should have been, and I wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install and setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered, though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. A ring notification had alerted me to motion at the front door while I was at work, half expecting to see a delivery person, pet, or lawn care salesman for the 15th time. You can imagine my surprise when I saw a clip of a young woman leading my daughter into the house hand in hand with my husband and other daughter close behind them. The girls were supposed to be in daycare and my husband at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Oh no. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the F this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call, though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was likely the source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also a registered sex offender and a recovering addict who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had molested them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked to her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was in our house with our children. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all, and still somehow infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she had hurt, and my husband was high on that list. My husband didn't want me to know, or worse, try and keep her family, our children, away from her. So they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage in my husband's car so the ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. She spent the night on the weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. She babysat our girls on a night that my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised on his life I had dressed her in myself. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist, shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I had given birth. 4 years after I had told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies, and be left with a world full of guilt and regret as they grow older. He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband and because no other versions of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mind F, I now have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation and a lot of anger. Relevant comments, OP's response to calling the police and contacting a divorce attorney. Already on it, believe me, we're going scorched earth with this mother.
My cousin proposed to my best friend at my wedding. Story time. So my cousin Steve came to me about a week before my wedding and asked if he could propose to my best friend Amy. And obviously, I said no. He was outraged. It was as if I'd just told him to go die in a hole. I'm not too sure what possessed Steve to think that proposing at my wedding would be the best time to propose to his girlfriend, who just so happened to be my best friend, aka the maid of honour, but we all know Steve moves mad. Maybe I shut him down a little bit too harsh, but he ended up telling the whole entire family. I started to get calls from his mum, my auntie, my mum, and then it started with my fiancé. None of them could get it in their little heads that this was about me and my fiancé, not about Steve and Amy. They really did try to pull my leg and twist my arm to get me to come round to it, but there was no proposals happening at my wedding. So fast forward to the day of the wedding, and it was absolute perfection. My fiancé was bawling as he walked down the aisle. We said the most beautiful vows to each other, but then it all sort of fell apart at the reception. There was so much tension between me and everyone that was upset with me about the whole cousin proposal situation. My aunt was even sat during the ceremony shooting me dirty looks. Like, babe, just get over it, doll. It's a bloody wedding. Chill the fuck out. But I was being a bigger person, so I just chose to ignore it all. I promised myself that nothing was going to stop me from having the best day of my life. But apparently, Steve was going to do everything he could to ruin it for me. And in some alternative universe, I kind of respect what he did next. He really did subscribe to being a hater of the wedding. I watched him walk across the dance floor towards Amy and reach for his back pocket. And I just knew I was not about to be the only girl turning a bride that day. So my dad had just finished his speech. And in his speech, he called me a precious princess who wouldn't hurt a fly. Little did he know, I wasn't about to hurt a fly. I was about to drop kick a fly. I had been taking Muay Thai lessons in my spare time, just for a little bit of self-defense. So I sprinted across the dance floor to where my cousin was standing. He tapped Amy on the shoulder. She stood up from her seat at the table, and as she turned round, all she would have seen is my fist flying into Steve's mouth. I had absolutely no fear at this point, and I'm just gonna condense down a little bit what happened next. Steve's mum saw me smack him, so she then flew at me and tried to take me down, but my mum has always had my back, and she had my back in this situation too. She grabbed my aunt, aka her sister, off me and threw her into the buffet by her hair. Whilst my aunt and my mum were fighting on top of the buffet, Amy then decides she wants to pipe up and screams at me, "How could you ruin that for me?" So I did what any normal person would do, and I threw my wedding cake at her.
I'm paying for my husband's mistress's bills. What? Historically in my marriage, I have been the breadwinner. So my husband and I decided together that he would take care of the children. We had twins and I went back to work a month after I had them. Everything was fine up until they turned 7 years old. This is when I noticed that my husband was starting to get jealous and envious of my success. So much so that he would get mad at me for every little thing I did. For example, not washing the dishes the way he wanted me to wash them, doing the laundry too late, or generally helping around the house was a big no-no for him. So he's also controlling. It's almost like he was looking for any little excuse to set off. Then I realized I was walking on eggshells every single minute of the day when I was home. I started taking the kids out by myself, but my husband did not like this. He said that I was trying to monopolize the kids' time and that he wanted to spend time with them too. Wait, isn't he home with them all the time? What do you mean? 2 months ago, he confessed everything. He said that he hated me, hated my success, and that I made him feel emasculated for being so much more successful than he could ever be. He also said that I'm overbearing and controlling. Then he threatened to get a job, which I said yes to, and then he got even angrier. I'm assuming because he doesn't really want to get another job. Then he suggested that if I just let him do whatever he wants, i.e., sleep with other women, he will be happier in the relationship. This way he can feel like a man with another woman while I bring the bread home for the kids. Now, here's the thing. I do love my husband. In fact, I love him so much that I said yes to this. So here are the rules he laid down for this new situation. Apparently, he'd already been seeing somebody, didn't bother to tell me about her. All he wanted me to know was that she was younger than me and prettier. Every now and then he started asking me for money. I asked him what it was for, and then he said it's for you-know-who. It's gotten to the point where he'll just forward me her bills and have me send PayPal money. The only reason I'm doing it is because I don't want him to leave me. It would be embarrassing if my family finds out, and I would not want the kids to be without their father. But I'm getting to the point where everything is an insult. He sent me 2 bills, one for the kid's dentist, and one for a jewelry store where he got her an $800 necklace. He's never bought me anything before in my life. I've been the one to buy him every single shirt in his closet. In order for me to not get upset every time I see something, I decided to give him a checking account. In it, I put $30,000, and that's the limit for the next 3 months. I suggested couples therapy, but he laughed and told me that I was crazy for even trying.
Am I the asshole for refusing to listen to my mother-in-law's speech on my wedding? So I hate speeches. I never understood the appeal. I think they are boring, exhausting, and very, very forced. But having said that, this is just my opinion and I never forced it on anyone. Fair. I have sat through long, excruciating speeches without complaining, like any other decent human being. When it was my turn to get married, however, I requested no speeches. We wrote that we loved everyone and that we knew they loved us. So if you wanted to say something, say it directly to us in private. My husband thought it was funny, but he knew my feelings about speeches. We had a small wedding with only loved ones, a weekend long. My husband loves games, so the wedding planner did a really great Taskmaster type of game, and everyone appreciated it. Dinner came and mother-in-law stood up and started by saying, quote, "I know we are forbidden to make speeches by the bride, but this is my only son getting married, so I will say what I want to." I didn't hear the rest because I was seeing red. My sisters and bridesmaids were shocked. I pretended like she wasn't talking and continued my conversation with my girls. My mother-in-law was furious. Both sister-in-laws were furious, and my husband was very angry that it showed in his profile. He refused to even look at me. The rest of the night was awkward. The husband's side was sulking in their seats. I wanted to make sure it wasn't ruined for the rest of us, and we ended up having a blast. Next day, I spent it with my family and friends. My husband said that I was very wrong in what I did. I couldn't force mother-in-law to shut the fuck up, and he knew she wouldn't no matter how much we told her. I shouldn't have disrespected and humiliated her like this. Our marriage started on the wrong foot, it seems. Am I the asshole?
Am I the asshole for accidentally drugging my best friend's kid? Best friend since childhood, and my relationship with him is under turmoil. He had bought a new home and asked me to come over to watch the game. Granted, him and his wife, who I've also been friends with for years, don't always see eye to eye, particularly with my use of marijuana. Okay. I used to smoke on their balcony, but she asked me to stop out of fear her neighbors would notice and she'd get a lease infraction at their apartment. That's fair. Fair enough, yeah. I started vaping instead when I'd come over, and she asked me to stop it because it's inappropriate around kids. I decided to smoke before coming over, but she complained about the weed smell, so I resorted to edibles this time. I came in and set my bag down, pulled a cookie, and ate a quarter of one, and put the rest back.
To the house?
Yes. As we watched the game, her 5-year-old got into my bag when no one was looking and pulled out the cookie and took a bite. My best friend and his wife scolded her for going into my bag, but I had to admit to them it was a weed cookie. Chaos ensued. The wife started freaking out at as my best friend started raising his voice. The chaos caused the kid to start crying, and that freaked the mom out even more. My best friend told me to leave as his wife was crying, saying we have to go to the hospital. Okay, Neither of them smoke, so I know it was an overreaction. Neither of them smoke, so I know it was an overreaction. Bad, but not life-threatening. My best friend later called me and said I need to show up to the hospital and help explain because he was paranoid of having CPS called on him. The thing is, I had eaten the whole cookie by then because of the stress and was in no condition to drive or communicate in that kind of setting. So I said no. Am I the asshole? Odd comment, I gotta read.
Am I
Friend's wife, stop bringing weed to our house. Original OP. What's another way I can bring weed to my friend's house?
My fiancée told me the reason why she wants to marry me. Now I'm breaking off the engagement. I am 35, and Nicole, F33, have been together for almost 5 years. How we met was relatively unusual. I have a twin brother. Identical twins. When we were teenagers, he had a slight obsession with racing cars. It was obvious that he would do something stupid. He borrowed a sports car from a friend's father, and it took less than 15 minutes before he had an accident that ended in his death. The whole family was basically devastated, especially because he crashed into a car with a family inside. Only the father survived. Unfortunately, the 2 children and the mother succumbed to their injuries. I can't even describe the feeling I had when this came out. The entire town attacked our family because we dared to mourn my brother's death. My mother wanted to attend the family funeral to pay her respects. The husband practically beat her at the grave. This then resulted in a court hearing in which he was sentenced to high compensation and a short time in prison. That gave him the rest financially. Of course, we were all ostracized, but we couldn't move away because my father got sick and couldn't take the stress anymore. Fast forward 6 years ago. I took over the grave maintenance, and I always noticed that someone was putting flowers on their grave. I found that strange, but I was happy that someone remembered him as more than a murderer. At some point, I met a woman at his grave. That was Nicole. She said at the time that she thought it was terrible how we were treated back then, and she felt obligated to do something good for him. After all, he had been more than just an idiot who was driving too fast. I thought that was very nice, and it developed into a friendship and ultimately a relationship. The last 5 years have been the best of my life, and it only took me so long to ask her the question because I wanted to be on solid financial ground first before I asked her. She said yes straight away, and both of our families are very happy about it. Everything was actually fine, at least until the rehearsal dinner 2 weeks ago. We tried all the wines we wanted to serve, and as it happens, it didn't take long until the whole group was pretty drunk, and the whole thing turned into a party. That was completely okay with me. Nicole sat with her sisters, and they talked. I didn't want to interrupt, so I stood a little behind her and wanted to let her finish when I overheard the conversation. Nicole and her siblings are only half siblings. Her father and mother had separated, and her father had married a new woman. They died a few years ago. One of the sisters only told me this shortly before the rehearsal dinner. I actually never met her father. Only the sisters from their mother's new marriage. The sisters are 15, 18 and 20. I didn't hear the other 3 asking Nicole to think about it all again. That her plan was stupid and diabolical and that I didn't deserve it. I had nothing to do with the loss her father had to deal with, and she was never mistreated by me or my family. This left me more than taken aback. Nicole was drunk and said something about how my whole family deserves to be razed to the ground. That shocked me. I then interrupted her and asked her what she meant by that. Nicole acted like she didn't know what she was talking about. However, I didn't let it go though. Finally, it got too much for her, and she started screaming that I had hurt her. As soon as we are married, she will do everything to ensure my family crumples, just like we did with her father. Then everything made sense. My mother heard all this, too, and immediately started crying. I went home with my mom because I couldn't stand Nicole's face anymore. I first moved in with my mother. Nicole didn't answer for a few days until she stood at the door crying and pleading that she was sorry, that she didn't mean what she said, that the alcohol was involved. At that moment, however, I realized that I didn't care at all. Over the last few days, I've had time to think about what happened, and I've simply realized that even if she just said that, marriage to her is out of the question. I informed everyone